Welcome back to the ethics of conflict resolution, negotiation, and peace building. Today I would like to talk a bit about party empowerment and power balancing. Now, power balancing, this is a fascinating course. It covers the ethics, not so much negotiation, and I'll explain that in a minute, but certainly other conflict resolution processes like the classical ombuds, the impartial investigator, the mediator, and then peace building encompasses all of negotiation, conflict resolution at a very global, most troubled, conflicted level. I will talk a bit about that too. Actually, if you are reading my book, Negotiation Alchemy, you are being introduced to all of this within actual global peace building. These are case study examples of peace building happening when I was facilitating cross-ethnic dialogue during the Balkans War, when I was teaching students from war-torn countries at the University of Oslo International Summer School, students from not only the Balkans, but the Middle East, Palestinians and Israelis, and students from war-torn countries like Cameroon. You will see case studies from Ukraine. Actually, Nepal is there. Most of you don't know that the Maoist terrorists were a problem within Nepal before they transitioned from monarchy to democracy. So you will get a really wonderful, rich, real-world introduction to NCR and peace building there. Today, though, because I want to talk about party empowerment and mediator power balancing, I am going to be focusing more on my workbook. My first publication, Holding These Truths, Empowerment and Recognition in Action, an interactive case study curriculum for multicultural dispute resolution. The reason I am focusing on this handbook, and I hope and will encourage all of you to be actively attempting to write in this book, this workbook, do the activities, practice your skills, the skills you've learned in negotiation, tactics, and mediation. Because even though I do understand, and if you've read the introduction, I discussed this more than once, that many of you traditional students are going to feel anxious when you are given incomplete information, when you are asked to apply your knowledge to real-world complexity and ambiguity. I know from experience using these case studies with my students at UC Berkeley, my students at Pepperdine Strauss Institute for dispute resolution, and my students here, who I have taught for the last 13 years, that by actively working with this workbook, you will empower yourselves to start. And party empowerment is one of our broadest categories. You have probably already read the intro to empowerment in case study 1, if you are reading the material and holding these truths. Frankly, all of education, what you are doing here in our program is empowerment. But the other thing that's wonderful to discover using this workbook, and I'm assuming you've all had negotiation tactics and mediation. Most of my ethics students have had those courses. You will discover that by practicing the skills you've learned, for example, reframing positional demands into underlying party interests and needs. The first case study and some of the subsequent case studies ask you to do this regularly. You are going to discover that our skills empower. And the more you're able to practice and master these skills, the more empowered you will be as an NCRP practitioner. Learning these skills over time, practicing and improving, developing these skills over time, will allow you to also empower your parties to conflict, because you will be teaching them these skills, especially I'm envisioning all of you mediating, whether informally at a volunteer community level, in your workplace, as a supervisor manager. I know at least one of you has been doing this in your work already. Or as a professional, as I have been for the last 30 years. I actually, before I was asked to start teaching, was asked to start mediating at a professional level. When I first started mediating, like most new mediators, I was doing mediation at a volunteer community level. Critical experience with these skills and these processes, because each conflict is unique. And the other thing I want to say, for those of you feeling anxious about filling in the blanks of this workbook, is welcome to the real world. I started my full-time conflict resolution, education, and consulting practice, along with my mediation practice, 25 years ago, and these case studies are from my real world practice. There is no one, when someone hires you to help them, and normally no one will hire you professionally and pay you generously unless they are in the most complex, ugly, entrenched conflict. When that happens, there is nobody present to fill in the blanks of information. The consultant mediator themselves needs to be asking the questions, needs to be determining what NCRP tool might be helpful, and then doing reflective practice, which is, once again, testing out what you think might be helpful based on the information you have, and learning from experience, applying, critiquing, evaluating, doing, action research. Is this helping? Is it hurting? What do I need to do differently? It's an ongoing step-by-step process, and these case studies introduce you to that world. And the benefit of working with this workbook is it's low cost, low risk. Actually, I can't think of a risk, a problem with practicing with this workbook, because my students who do inevitably are my star students, receive the highest grade in this class, but are also preparing themselves to have the courage, the clarity, the capacity to take what they're learning in NCRP into the real world. Now, for the few of you who have already been practicing mediation or other NCRP in the real world, I hope, because of your seasoned experience and confidence, you can be encouraging your classmates and helping them with this real world simulation. Okay, let's talk about empowerment with parties. First of all, I'll tell you from my experience teaching NCRP students at Dominguez Hills and around the world for many years, most of you still don't know how to do the Harvard win-win integrative interest identification. You are still confusing positional demands with needs and interests. It's very common, nothing to feel bad about. But by using these case studies to actually practice and learn how to truly identify underlying interests, you're not only empowering yourself as a practitioner, but you will provide that critical bridge from win-lose distributive bargaining, what is most commonly understood and taught by our faculty because, for example, Professor Dern, Dixon Dern, our renowned entertainment lawyer, professor of negotiation tactics, comes from a legal world. He comes from the win-lose world where you have to compromise and meet in the middle. That does not require Harvard negotiation reframing of demands and positions to identify the most important party needs. But most of the complex case studies that I have worked with peace building around the world require that as a bridge. The demands, the positions, the cultural perspectives, stories, narrative are just too far apart to do the distributive dance and meet in the middle. I think you all comprehend this is not a simple sale of a car. It's not a simple business transaction. We're talking about people's cultural life experience, generational experience, and so we must identify their most important underlying needs and use that as a bridge to explore, discover commonalities, and then move into creative problem-solving peace building. This book will help you do that. Okay, now I have promised you I will only speak 10 to 15 minutes each lecture because I know your attention spans are probably about 3 minutes, and listening to me on the computer is one of the most challenging things you can do. So let me complete this by talking mostly about power balancing, what the mediator does with parties. Before I transition, though, everything you're learning in our program is something you can teach your parties to empower them. Now, many of you new to working with conflict assume that you're simply going to go out and ask the parties to listen to each other. That is not the real world of entrenched, ugly, angry conflict. Most parties are far from being able to even be in the same room with each other. That is a minor miracle when it happens. We as mediators must be listening to them and then reframing, paraphrasing, using active listening to help them calm down by experiencing our insightful listening within their anger, within their sadness, their crying, building that safe space where they can learn. We need to take that lead. But as we're taking that lead, they are watching us. They are hopefully seeing the best of what we know how to do, and that will help empower them. Now, the mediator has many codes of ethics. And if you haven't started to notice the code of ethics, let me point this out to you. At the end of each case study section, and right now I am trying to find the end of case study section 1 so that I can give you a concrete example. Great. I am on pages 46 and 47 of Holding These Truths, and you will see proposed third-party conflict intervener competencies, and those skills are listed on both page 46 and 47. What is quoted under these skills, if you look on the bottom of page 46, you will see the Academy of Family Mediators Standards of Practice for Family and Divorce Mediation, hereinafter AFM. You will also see Colorado Council of Mediators and Mediation Organizations, Code of Professional Conduct for Mediators, hereinafter CCMO. We do not have a mandatory code of ethics. There are several code of ethics, obviously, that vary nationally and state by state. and you are getting a sampling of these code of ethics. Now, as you hopefully already know, there are very few states that license mediators. Florida is one. Otherwise, California does not have certification or licensure, but we do have codes of ethics. And if you become involved with the Association for Conflict Resolution or the International Ombudsman Organization, you will see that the code of ethics are highly respected and discussed in our professional circles, but they're not mandatory. Now, these codes of ethics do not apply if you're negotiating. Certainly, you can empower yourself and parties' advocacy in negotiation, and you should, but there's no code of ethics. So people lie, they practice bad faith, no problem. I mean, what our current U.S. President Donald Trump promotes is okay in many circles because we do not have ethical standards. In fact, academically, some of our negotiation scholars argue that lying is expected. Not so with mediation. I will be expecting you to reference these codes of ethics when you do your weekly analysis and facilitation of case study issues and dilemmas, and really look at what the ombuds and mediators must pay attention to. And one of those requirements is power balancing. Chris Moore, who wrote the first book introducing mediation to the world, is quoted in Holding These Truths as saying a mediator must facilitate a just and fair process. That means a mediator must be prepared to empower parties, to help them empower themselves, and ensure that the most powerful, such as the corporations of the world, or the U.S., if we're talking international mediation, is not able to exploit and manipulate the less powerful parties. And Holding These Truths gives you many ideas for doing this and ensuring that you are facilitating an ethical process. Rather than talk more today about power balancing, I'm going to welcome your questions as you learn more reading both Negotiation Alchemy and Holding These Truths. Have a great week. Talk to you soon.